Another UNLV All Access podcast. Caleb Herring is here, the former UNLV quarterback and host of the Barry Odom radio show and analyst during the games. It's Cofield, sideline reporter, and jack of all trades, master of maybe a few. Another week of practice under the belt of UNLV football and head coach Barry Odom. We're doing this on Saturday morning. They've got a big scrimmage tonight. They're going to do it under the lights, I guess, weather permitting. I think they want the weather. They want it to be safe, but they want to. It sounded to me like when Odom talked about it, they're looking forward to some adverse conditions to replicate maybe what happens at several of the games during the season. So for you, Caleb, when you were out there watching practice, you were out there multiple days. I know you and I were together on a couple of days, and one of the days was not a great day for the offense, really good day for the defense. And then the next day, the offense was good, but you noticed something about, hey, we're going to put some adversity towards the defense, and the offense really thrived by going up pace, and that speeding things up, it made it look really good for the offense.
Yeah, I think it's a really good sign when the offense can pick up the tempo a little bit, just because I think that tells you a few things. One, it tells you that you've gotten to a point in your offense where you feel comfortable enough to go faster. Like the guys know what they're doing. They know their assignments. Another part about that is you feel confident that your defense can still get a look and actually get quality reps out of your offense going fast. Because a lot of times it turns into a real cluster when you start going fast, and if everybody's not, aware of their duties or responsibilities, it's chaos out there. And it turns into, not a productive time in practice. So you want to be careful about using tempo too much. And then on top of that, you want to be careful about going off script too much, especially during fall camp, during install and stuff like that. It's tough to find that balance, but I think sometimes you get true reps when you go off script and you let the coaches kind of call it how they see it. And then the tendencies and situational stuff starts to come up, and the players get used to kind of the game feel of plays being called. Now, obviously, the scrimmage is kind of catered to that, but once you get to a level in fall camp and throughout the season where the players kind of understand what's going on, you can do these kind of non-scripted segments of practice more and more often. And we talk about it a lot. I know I say it a lot as a former quarterback, as an offensive guy. Defense always has an advantage in practice. When there's a script set, the defense will always have advantage, unless that script obviously is catered to put the defense in a bad spot intentionally. But for the most part, the defense has the edge. So every now and then, throwing a little wrinkle at the defense, making the offense have some sort of advantage, it helps. It helps the team chemistry, helps the offense feel a little better about themselves. But that's the grind of fall camp. And where UNLV is right now, at least from what I watched in the last couple of practices, you can see that they're kind of in a more comfortable spot where the reps are a little bit more fine-tuned. I wouldn't say there's less reps necessarily, not intentionally, but I think the focus has been narrowed a little bit. And Coach Odom mentions it, and when we talk to him after practice, that the focus and the guys that they want to see on one field, so the attention to detail is there now at this point in camp. And that's a good sign. That's a good sign to have a couple weeks left here before the first game, and to be at that point where you feel like you can up the tempo a little bit, speed it up, get your offense flowing, get some big plays, explosion going on. That's a good sign right now at this point in camp.
Yeah, Odom's interesting to talk to when he kind of lays out the goals and the plans and the steps getting ready for the beginning of the season. There's definitely some structure there, and he gives you a pretty honest opinion on where they are right now. We'll talk later in the podcast about this scrimmage that's coming up later today and what they're looking for out of that scrimmage. So in practices, what do you think percentage-wise, special teams work? I don't think it's a third, even though we talk about all three units being, it's 3 units, offense, defense, special teams. What do you think it is, 20%, 15%? Because it's definitely more than Arroyo worked on. It's definitely, I mean, you played for Bobby Houck, who actually doubled as a special teams coach. Like, right. For you, when you watch, how much of practice do you think special teams is?
I would be close to a third, not quite there, but I know there's at least 3 different periods that are devoted to special teams, and they start practice off with special teams work. There's a period in between, in the middle, where they will shift, and it's kind of sudden. I don't know if there's an exact period every time, or if each practice is scripted uniquely, but they'll stop midway through practice and get another special teams period in. And I'm talking, not just a quick 2 minutes here. It's like individual drills in one portion, then there's team drills in another portion, and then at the end of practice, they usually end with some sort of special teams unit making a play, whether it's just the end of 2-minute drill and you got to kick the field goal to tie it or something like that. But they get special teams work in that way as well. So I would say maybe not quite a third, but very close to a third of practice is spent on special teams, with the focus being intently special teams. And for the most part, it's been drill work. I mean, we haven't really seen the structure of team altogether and how that's going to look. We've seen it, but not too much. And part of that probably had to do with the fact that the second field wasn't done. So it's harder to kind of get the whole special teams unit or multiple special teams unit going at the same time. But they've broken it down into segments. The deep guys, the up backs and things like that work together. The frontline guys are on the opposite field working together. But there's multiple times during practice where they're devoted to special teams. And I think one of the unique things, going back to my playing days, special teams, and even with Coach Arroyo, special teams was never the start of practice. And I think that was, you lose a lot of value when you don't do it that way. And you can see from when we're out there, the energy level when special teams is going on. Guys' legs are fresh. So they're giving more effort. Their mental focus is there because they're not as physically tired. And then you don't see it as sort of a break. And all that goes into it when I think the structure of the practice, like you said, Coach Odom, it's very intentional. It's very meticulous almost when you look at the way practice is set up, from the way they get their reps, from where they put special teams, how often they do special teams. It's the focus is there, and you'll see improvement, I think, just based on some of the drills we've watched. The improvement, I think, on the special teams unit is going to be evident because it's all there. The focus is all there this year.
We sat down with James Shibest and pulled a bunch of cuts for conversation, kind of breaking down what he's trying to do. So this part of the conversation, he was asked about, hey, is there a hunger? A lot of guys coming to you who want to play special teams. His answer was really interesting. And then on how he decides who's going to play special teams. And we're talking mostly about coverage. Obviously, guys aren't coming like, hey, I want to be the third kicker.
I don't know. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Obviously, if you're going to get on the bus to the game, they know they have to be involved in some way. But yes, you do see a little hungriness to do that. I mean, you got to make it, and that's my job, to make it exciting for them. And it's I think it's a real true team player, because obviously we want to be really good on offense and really good on defense. And then, when you're working on special teams too, it's more work, right? So, but I mean, everybody has been really good balled in, but by their actions and demeanors, you can tell the ones that really want to, and that's what they're getting evaled on, and they know that. So, we tell them there's a time that comes, there's going to be so many dudes getting on the plane or going to the stadium or what have you. And if you're not adding value to the team in some way, then you got to sit home and watch, so. Pretty good motivation, right?
Without saying it, you say it like, hey, you want to go on the road trips, you want to be part of the team. You're not really, ones and twos, so you got to contribute. So that attitude's important.
Yeah, it really is. I think it's not just him. He said it there that it's his job to make sure that the enthusiasm and the attitude about special teams is there. It's staff wide, and being at practice and watching the special teams portions, every position coach, everybody's involved and there and engaged and evaluating those periods in practice. And so even if maybe you aren't number one on the depth chart as the defense or the offense, you understand that you're being evaluated for the effort and the technique that you can show on the field during special teams. And that is a way to get on the plane. And we can go back through football history of guys that made a name for themselves on special teams. And I think the most famous example is Terrell Davis, where he made plays on special teams that kept him on a roster, right? You're talking about NFL, not getting cut. The ability to stay on the roster then led to him becoming a starting running back eventually, and then having a Hall of Fame Super Bowl winning career, right? So those are the things that you want to keep imparting to special teams guys. There are guys that are just going to cut out a niche on special teams, and that there should be nothing wrong with that, right? There's 22 positions on the field for offensive defense, but then you add another 11 for each special teams unit. There's plenty of opportunity to get on the field to make a name for yourself and to make an impact. I think that's what a lot of people have forgotten, that special teams is an impact position. Like, you can be on the field on a special teams unit and make an impact on the game and make a name for yourself, especially if you're a younger guy. And I think one of the main things that you want to do as a coaching staff is to make sure that you take politics out of it. and this might be, this is not something that I've seen, but this is just from my own personal experience. If a guy feels like maybe he should be starting as a number one guy on the offense or the defense unit, it's going to be hard to convince him to play special teams because he's looking at it like, I'm better than that guy at safety or that guy at linebacker. So now you kind of naturally, as a human, go into like almost a pouty mode where it's like, you're kicking me in special teams and I deserve to be a 1 on defense. And I don't think that's the case at UNLV. I think everybody that's in position right now on the depth chart, 1, 2, and in the rotation, I think you can see that they've earned that spot. And everybody behind them sees that they earned that spot. So then it's easier to say, okay, be enthusiastic about being one of the guys chosen for special teams, even if you're not starting on one of the other units. So I think the overall attitude on special teams has changed drastically from back when I was playing. I think this is maybe even unique to any program across the country. The emphasis that they're putting on special teams and kind of the attention that to detail that's paid to that unit as a third unit instead of just that other unit that happens in between offense and defense.
Here's Shibest talking about the potential of using starters on the special teams units.
So obviously the starters, the backups, and even some guys that's their only roles. They probably won't play on offense or defense. We're working all them guys. And then I think it becomes a mixture, hopefully. Hopefully you got a great core of backups that, they're playing on 3 or 4 of these units, and then you have some starters that you can sprinkle in. But we won't sacrifice it. If we got to have all guys that are playing on offense and defense are starting to be good on these units, we'll do that too. And they know that. So, but it's usually a good mixture as you like. And I think it builds good team chemistry and good team unity. So, but you like to have them core guys, that's their main roles and are great backups for offense or defense. But it don't matter. I think you got to be 3 deep going into the game pretty solid, especially early in the season because you're just not in game shape and what have you. You may have to be rotating guys in and out throughout the game. So it's a full team effort on this. So, but we do try to mix it in pretty good.
What do you think? Any starters on this team actually going to be playing on special teams or too dangerous early in the season?
I would say early in the season, probably not. I think that the goal would be early in the season to kind of have auditions to see if you can go without using your starters. I think as the season goes on, and if you realize, and this is, a kind of maybe the worst case scenario in terms of special teams unit, if you realize you don't have those guys who you can say are maybe 2 or 3 on the depth chart, but full-time special teams guys, then maybe you do start to sprinkle some of the starters in. And I think with the attitude around the players just being out there at practice, I think the attitude is the starters are preparing as if they are going to play special teams. Like it's not the time for the starters to sit back and relax. So everybody's out there just as involved. There's nobody that outside of Doug and the quarterback room, obviously they're not back there catching punts or running down as gunners. But everybody else pretty much is wide open to be on any of these units. And they act like that during the periods. And I'll just point out Jackson Woodard, who I think is one of the guys who you can etch in and one of the names that I'm sure the coaches have probably maybe pinned in as a starter on the defense. He's a guy that's out there on special teams, giving it 100% effort. We were watching them one day. They were doing a drill where, they're practicing retreating to get depth on the kickoff return and then setting and going and engaging a blocker. And Jackson Woodard's out there and he's a potentially a starting linebacker and he's running out there 100% full speed, not taking it easy on a guy and just getting in position and kind of touching pads. It's like a full tilt drill. Like he's going as if he's doing a linebacker drill. And those are the kind of things that you see as a leader on the defense at this point. When you see him out there giving that much effort as a third string guy, how dare you not go out there and reciprocate that effort? How dare you not go out there and put your best foot forward on the special teams unit? And that kind of transcends throughout the rest of the roster. And that's why I think from what I've seen, it's the most intense special teams portions of practice that I've been around. As a player, as an analyst, I've seen special teams practice, and typically what it turns into is rest the starters. I'm not saying that the starters will all be on special teams, but the starters are potentially going to have a role to play. And that's, like I said, if things don't go as they plan, Shibest mentioned he wants to have a unit of guys that's their, ideally that would what you have, a unit of guys that they're special teams guys, and that's all they do. And they do it 100% and they do it effectively. So we'll see how it shakes down. I'd imagine early in the season the starters won't be too involved, and those other guys will be getting a chance to kind of audition for it under the lights. But that could change. Everybody's fair game when it comes to special teams. They're not going to sacrifice anything when it comes to that.
And then there's the subject of the kicks they're actually covering, right? So on punt coverage, they're backing up what Marshall Nichols is going to do. So listen to Shibest talk about Nichols and some of the improvements that he needs to make, and a lot of it's about consistency.
Marshall, he's really talented. When I got here, he's had trouble with his getting the ball off quicker. You know what I'm saying? And he's improved that. He's struggled a little bit with consistency, but the more we get that going, he'll start kicking the ball a little bit better. But he's got great talent in his backup, Ryan O'Hara. He was kicking off. We just moved him to punter, and he continues to improve.
Very interesting game in terms of tutelage with the punters. Nichols last year, believe it or not, he averaged 42.4 a punt, which sounds really good. But punters have advanced a lot in terms of yardage. He's not terrible, but he was 60th in the country, so kind of middle of the pack. And a lot of it, I think the consistency is height on the punts, hang time. And Shibest did mention, hey, he'd be fine if it was like massive hang time and 42 yards, and most of the kicks result in no return. He'll take a net of 42. But it was interesting hearing him discuss Marshall speeding up, because he did have, 2 punts blocked in the Notre Dame game. I think he had another punt block during the season. Like, that just cannot happen. He's got to reach the next level.
Yeah, those 2 block punts led directly to points. Short fields for Notre Dame in that game, recalling that. It was one of those bizarre moments where it's like they blocked another one like the exact same way. What's going on here? And obviously coming into this, everybody who's a Rebel fan understands that special teams was an issue in multiple ways, not just the punt unit. I mean, kickoff, not having many touchbacks last season. Probably the one shining spot was the field goal unit, because Gutierrez was kind of muddy in that regard, but everything else had its issues throughout the season. And when you're talking about the procedure and the time to get the ball off, we saw how serious, just to back up what Shibest was saying there, how serious they're taking the mechanics and getting the function down quickly. Coach Odom was out there with the stopwatch during one of the punt portions of practice during camp, and he had the stopwatch from the snap to the kick. He was getting on all of the punters who were taking their shots and making sure they had a satisfactory time of getting the ball off and into the air. And you can see it made them focus in and hone in on their steps, and making sure there's no false steps, no, it goes down to the snap, making sure that the snap's on target, because that could disrupt the timing for a punter. Everything about that function was being timed by Coach Odom, not by Shibest. Coach Odom's coming over there with a stopwatch, making sure you're on time. This is how serious they're taking it. And I remember, people that don't know, and if you remember my senior year, I was actually the holder for the field goal unit. So I would hold every time after we scored a touchdown. I would hold for the PAT, I would hold for field goals. It's a nerve-wracking experience, but it gave me an appreciation for the function and how important it is to be on time with everything. If the kicker's waiting for you to catch the snap before he starts his approach, that's taking too long. If you're not getting the ball set and the laces spun out on time, it slows down the kicker's function. A fraction of a second is the difference between a block kick and a successful 50-yarder, for instance. And you see sometimes, especially with the way these guys are coming around the edge these days, how quick it is, how close it is sometimes from not getting that kickoff. And that's on the PAT. Now, with different punt formations and the kind of the way people are focused on covering punts, protection isn't prioritized as much. And even if you do prioritize it, there's still a finite amount of time before you're going to get it blocked regardless. Just like a quarterback, you have a clock. The protection can hold up, but not forever. So you have to have that internal clock that's like, I need to get rid of it. Same thing with punters. It's a little quicker. But you mentioned with Nichols, the hang time. I think his distance, when you look at the average down the field distance he had, it was fine. It was pretty much average. But then the hang time, I think, is what was inconsistent. And hang time is more important, in my opinion, because you don't want to return. You can get it 40 yards down the field with no return. You'll take that, unless you're kicking from the back of your own end zone all the time. That's a little bit of a different story, right? But I think the hidden yardage within special teams that you can find, where's their offense starting from throughout the course of a game. Yeah, you might have given up 400 yards of total offense. But if they had to drive the length of the field each time, that yardage doesn't add up to as many points in the long run. And that's kind of where special teams can have an impact on games that people maybe don't consider, but that's what punters are valuable for.
And if you're on the wrong side of the punting battle, I mean, it can really cost you. I think the last few years it's made it just very difficult to take out Nevada and especially San Diego State because on the heels of Matt Ariza, they had another good kicker last year and the battle there. And Marshall Nichols kind of held his own, but I mean, if you're on the wrong side of that by 10 or 15 yards, it's debilitating and trying to get a win. One more bite from Shibest as he talks about the kickers. So Jose Pizano is in from Missouri State, little guy, very accurate. And then Andre Meono is battling him as the 2. Listen to Shibest talk about both of those guys, and he'll close out by mentioning Meono. We'll build on that one.
Really, Jose, and then a guy y'all may not, Andre Meono, who transferred from Fresno, has been really solid too. So snappers have done a good job. So they've been progressing along. We got to do a good job not kicking them too much. We got walkthroughs and stuff at night too. So we have fresh legs when we get ready to play a game. But they've been really consistent. We've been really pleased with everything. And I'm hoping we can get some dang touchbacks too on kickoffs. I know Andre.
So there you go. He said, Andre is at 50 or 60% on touchbacks, which is good. I mean, I'm sure they would like it to be even higher. Like I said, a la Reno and San Diego State, because they just boom it through the freaking end zone and there's no returns. Interesting battle. I mean, I think Jose has the lead, but Meono did hit a 54-yard field goal at the end of Thursday's practice in a 2-minute drill, and Odom brought that up, and then they actually put the video out of that. So I think, what do you think? Pizano, like 90% hold on the job, but better be accurate because he's not a long kicker. He's not a long distance guy. And if there's any shakiness with accuracy, then Andre might be out there.
I think it's you're probably right. I think the accuracy from Jose is out there. If you hear Shibest say it, it's one of the running joke we got out at practice. But he's probably more accurate, so I think you'd probably see him at least to start. If I had to guess, he's pretty accurate. And he was all conference at Missouri State, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So he's got the accuracy down from there. But the 54-yarder was impressive. And anytime you can have a guy out there, and we may see a system where there's 2 kickers, where one handles the intermediate and short stuff, and the other one's out there for when you're on the edge of maybe the range and you're trying to maybe take a chance, and where you're in that punt it or try it zone on the field, maybe you bring out Andre and have him try to get it, because the 54-yarder in practice to end it, granted it's practice, kind of controlled environment, but it was in a 2-minute drill situation. They're on the clock. The play clock was running. And I think they even called the timeout before. They tried to ice him. But he knocked the 54-yarder down and got the whole team fired up. Obviously, the defense wasn't too happy because they lost the drill. But it's impressive to hit a 54-yarder and with room to spare. The video's out. It's on UNLV Football's Twitter account. We posted it as well on the All Access Twitter account. It was impressive, and it was a good way to end practice, I think, on a fiery note there. But then when you go to the touchback arena, I think this is one where you can really start to control field position. And I know the 25-yard line is not like backed up by any means. I'm not saying you're pinning guys back. But if you just take out the risk of a big play on the kickoff return or kickoff unit, then you don't have to worry about necessarily the quality of the coverage unit, right? So you're not, if you got guys that are in the 3s maybe and in the 4s in the rotation that are covering, you're not so concerned about maybe them missing or making tackles in open field or getting down there and covering a guy who maybe is a dangerous returner. And that way you're just relying really on your kicker to be the kickoff unit. He's kicking it out of the end zone at a consistent rate. You really don't have to worry about it. So the distance, I think, is gonna become a really strong point in that battle in regard to who's kicking off. I think the accuracy with field goals, I think you have a range that you're comfortable with where you're saying we're kicking a field goal, the 30-yard line and in. If you come up with a 4th down situation, you want to get points, you're going to kick a field goal. But it's the kickoffs. I think whoever can be more consistent with getting the ball into touchback range, that's going to be huge. And then if they can't be consistent there, you have to be accurate where you put the ball. There's a lot of accuracy and positional kicking that goes into kickoff coverage. You want to pin a guy near the corner so that the coverage team can kind of isolate them in that side, kick it away from where they like to return it. If they have a tendency on their kickoff return team to return it down the home sideline, for instance, then you want to kick it away from there. So then you kind of entice fair catches more often than you allow people to try to return it in flip field position.
So we've done a long block on special teams. One last thing to mention, I wanted to get your comment because I know when we were hanging out at practice, as you watch all the special teams drills, you said to me just something about the aggressiveness. And I know you wanted to comment on, because it's one thing to do drills, but what do you think of how they're doing the drills and what drills they're doing?
Yeah, it's a simulation of the real contact, the reality of the contact that happens. And a lot of what kickoff return is in particular, and this is kind of the drill that I was alluding to, is about space and closing the gap on the space to make sure you're engaging the block properly. So position yourself. And I talked about Jackson Woodard doing this, and the retreat back to depth. If you just visualize a kickoff return coverage, retreating back to depth, and then kind of building a wall, and then anticipating the contact that's coming. They don't shy away from allowing that contact to happen. They don't shy away from practicing that engagement because it's almost even more of a mental thing than a physical thing, right? Like the idea that somebody's running full speed at you and they're 20, 30 yards away, you knowing that that's the guy you're coming from and you're at a complete standstill while this guy's got a steam going full steam ahead at you. You have to mentally be ready for what that feels like. And I don't think a lot of teams maybe spend the time doing these kind of drills that turn into physical drills and get as fired up about these drills as maybe they should. And it reflects in the special teams and the way that's kind of deteriorated over time as something that's important to games, or at least in practice. And understanding you don't want to be physical all the time, but it's important, I think, to get those reps and to see who can do it, because it'd be a disaster to have a guy who gets out there and this is the first time he's had somebody, a starter, a big guy running at him, full speed ahead from 30 yards away. And the idea of positioning yourself to not just catch the block, but engage that block in that situation. It's a physical thing. And the rules that have changed that have tried to take some of this physical stuff out, like the wedge busting and forming a wedge, and those things are gone, but you still have to block somebody, right? You still have to cover and run full speed and make that contact running in a straight line. That doesn't really happen in the normal course of offense and defense between the sticks, right? These are the collisions that only really happen in special teams. And in the periods that we've seen, in the drills that they put together, they've really emphasized that physicality and that technique of being able to do that and be effective at it for everybody across the board. And I enjoy watching it. I like football in every regard, but I enjoy watching guys go out there and be physical and not be afraid of those moments and not shying away from that time in practice.
One last note on special teams. Shibest indicated that, and we've seen a rotation of kickoff return men and also punt return. Jacob DeJesus will be a candidate for both. I think my guess is he'll be, I think I don't know if he has a lead or not, but on punts, he mentioned DeJesus. He mentioned D'Angelo Irvin, which is really interesting. And then he said DeJesus again will be part of the kickoff mix. They also mentioned they like Jet Thomas out of Atlanta, and that the kickoff unit, and I was watching the other day, a lot of running backs are involved in that process. And even Jere Williams, actually, which is interesting, is working as a kickoff return man. This was a big week on availability and stories about both the defensive line and the offensive line. So let's start with the offensive line. This is a little bit of a long bite, so bear with it. There's a lot of good stuff in here. As Barry Odom talks about, hey, that's the unit that he believes has come together the fastest, maybe based on expectations, because, they lost Leaf Fontenot, the center, of a couple of years to Arizona State. And then in the spring, Purdue called on the starting guard, right, in Preston Nichols, and he went to the Big Ten.
I think they've gelled and they communicate really, really well right now. And that's hard because the guy that we thought might be the starting center, we're moving guys around, but the next guy up in that spot has taken over that role of communicating. Hasn't always been agreements, but getting on the same page. I think that they are seeing everything through each other's lens, and then they're working together collectively as a group. That would be, I think we've got a number of bright spots, but that would be the one that I'm excited about, because if you don't communicate on either side, especially at the offensive line, if you're not on the same page, then you don't have a chance. And I think we're running at a pretty high level with the communication piece of what that looks like.
Are you making switches on the O-line because of performance or some health-related issues?
All the above. And I think it's, again, the more, the more guys that we can get to be able to snap the ball, that we feel that can go in and play a game, then we can build around that. So, I mean, the tackle positions, I think the cross-training that Coach Weiss has done will pay off for us as the season goes, as things happen. I think it's so important to be able to broad scope look at, can Marcus Miller play center? You put a check, yes, he can. Can we win with him there? We can. Can he play guard? Yes. Can he play tackle? Yes. The more guys that we can get in that position, the better our football team is going to be. It's hard for those guys. I mean, that is a very, very difficult position to play. And then the ability to play and cross-train, in Marcus's position, 5 different spots. It's a credit to him on being a student of the game and really also embracing it.
Yeah, Odom has talked about Marcus Miller a lot. And for fans out there who knew the roster up and down and who played the last couple of years under Marcus Arroyo, you might be like, Marcus, what? Who? I want you to listen to Miller here as he answers a question about how hungry he is. And then I followed up with a basic question. I was kind of suggesting, like, we don't know who you are. And all of a sudden, you're in the rotation, and Odom really seems to like him.
Starving. It's been interesting coming from where I came from last year to all the way to now, and the position I'm in to be able to be a leader on the O-line and also get those first reps. It's amazing, and looking forward to it.
Where were you last year? I mean, I saw you around, but in terms of not playing or not winning over coaches, was it health related?
I think it was just not applying myself, honestly. Kind of looked in the mirror, and when we got this new coaching staff, there was an opportunity to win over coaches and wow people with my work ethic and being able to kind of start fresh.
I think when people hear us talk about a new coach and going into the spring and in the fall and you went through this, it's a clean slate. It can be a good or a bad thing for a player. You may have been, in the favor of the previous coaching staff. The new staff comes in and they're like, I don't get it. I don't see it. Miller's a great example of what can happen to so many guys who maybe couldn't move up the depth charts beyond the 3s and the 4s with an old coaching staff. These guys come in, and Miller himself thought to him, you know what, maybe I can break through here. And I thought the honesty there was incredible, where it's like, hey, I just didn't apply myself. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, wait, are there guys on every college football roster around the country who could be playing and like mentally and work off the field? They just don't get it yet. They're not putting in the work.
I think that's 100% true. I think every roster, every country, every high school, you have a guy that maybe has the God-given talent or the size or the speed or whatever the case may be to get to the dance, but for whatever reason doesn't apply themselves. Maybe because they never had to have success. There's guys that are just uber talented, right? That can just strap them up and go rush for 120 yards and 3 touchdowns, right? They've done that all their life. You get to college and work, like you asked me to work, to apply myself, to focus, to study film, to do all kinds of things. I mean, we listened to the Johnny Manziel documentary, and he's a guy that was one of those guys. It's like he got through a certain level in his career just being who he was. And then the moment something more was demanded of him and he didn't apply himself in that way, you see what happens to him. And I think there's a lot of guys that fall into this category. The sad truth about it is that a lot of guys don't have the moments of reality of realizing that I need to apply myself like Miller had. That takes a mature mindset to say, you know what? I was the problem. If I'm being honest with myself, I didn't apply myself. Previous coach or not, I didn't apply myself to whatever they were asking me to do, and I didn't perform. Now, when I got a fresh start with these coaches that don't know me, I'm going to make sure that I put my best foot forward. And I love the system of accountability that's been talked about by coaches. It's been echoed by players. And then we've seen examples in the conversations we've had. I remember going back to the spring, we talked to Jaden Mayava, who we thought was getting a lot of reps during the spring game. And we were saying he threw some touchdowns. We were trying to get him to kind of allude to how good he did. And he's like, immediately, no, it wasn't good enough. I could do better. I'm going to take some onus. There's some things I left on the field. And that kind of accountability is how teams grow and get better. It's not a complacency. It's not pointing the finger at who did what and who was wronging you. It's about, hey, I can do better. Let me control what I can control first. And then we'll see where the ships fall. And it is the flip side of the transfer portal. It is the flip side of the coaching carousel. Everybody looks at that as an opportunity to cut tail and leave. And I think what that does is it takes the pressure or the onus off of you, like to be the one to improve your situation. And I resonate with this story from my own career, my personal journey. It's like there was a moment of realism. There's like, I'm not doing what I can do. I'm not being the best I can be. Let me give it 100% first before I make a decision to cut ties and to transfer or whatever the case may be. And that takes maturity. And I love seeing it from players now, current players in this era of the transfer portal, getting out of situations. This didn't work for me. I'm going to go here. I think guys that are looking themselves in the mirror and taking responsibility and really just improving themselves. I think there's a story to be said about that as well. And Marcus Miller is one of those examples, I think, for UNLV.
Yeah, junior. And I can't keep track of eligibility anymore, so he may have 2 years beyond this. But 6'4", 295, was playing left tackle in the spring. Now he's working a lot at center. Odom also mentioned he can play guard, so that's incredibly valuable. And he's been with the program for 3 years. I will give him credit on this. If he didn't apply or kind of get it on the football front, he's a really high-level academic success. And, when we talk to him, smart guy, kind of soft-spoken. But I have a feeling as he plays, he's going to become more and more of a leader. And he mentioned Amani Trigg-Wright, who's another dude who's been really impressive over a long career now at UNLV. And the same thing, Amani Trigg-Wright did not play early in his career. And now you hear people talk about him, other players, and you're like, wow, this guy's really, really important to the offensive line. So for fans out there, and this is not a lecture because I have to remind myself of this as well, when guys come in, sometimes they just don't play the first couple of years. And it doesn't mean they're not a prospect anymore. It just doesn't click, and the competition is pretty intense. Now, what's important here is whoever plays center, you notice when there's problems. If it's seamless like it was most of the time with Lee Fountaino, and he was by PFF, he started out really well, and by the middle of the season he came down a little bit. But top 60 center in the country, top 70 center in the country, they need stability there, and they need good snaps. Right, the offense doesn't work unless these guys are pulling the trigger the right way. So we kind of went with the theme with both Brumfield and Miller, talking about the snap, the quality of the snap, what kind of snap you like. Brumfield's answer was actually pretty interesting. In the middle here, there's a little bit of a pause because I was talking about Aaron Rodgers and Hard Knocks and him lecturing some of his centers on how he likes it. And Caleb can speak to this in a couple of minutes on what the quarterback and each quarterback wants from a center. So here is Brumfield talking about the center exchange.
It's definitely a challenge. It gives you, it keeps you on your toes, and I feel like that's going to work out better for us in the season because you never know with injuries, different scenarios. A guy may be pulling, he may snap a little to the right when he's pulling to the right or anything like that. It just keeps you on your toes and ready for whatever. So when we get in the season and we may have a bad snap, this isn't your first bad snap. This isn't your first time running this play with a bad snap or under pressure. You're prepared.
It sounded like last year Leaf had a lot of responsibility in this offense with these centers.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have the same level of responsibility? Is it a little bit less? Is it more on you?
I would say it's a little bit less, and I can say that with saying we're a little early on in our offense. A lot of Leafs responsibility came later on in the offense once we had been under for about a year or two. That's when Coach felt comfortable giving him more responsibility. So right now I would say it's a little less, but who's to say that it may not be more later on.
I don't know if you're watching Hard Knocks, but there was a whole thing last night on Hard Knocks with Aaron Rodgers and getting the snap. Now, he was under center.
Yeah.
But do you have a certain type of ball you like coming? Like, he was, really hardcore on, I don't want to spiral. How did he put it?
Yeah, he didn't want spirals.
It was almost kind of like I don't know, it was kind of dead back to him.
Nah.
He just didn't want any movement.
Nah, whatever snap is fine. Whatever is most comfortable for the center. If he can get the ball back there comfortably and make his block, then that's perfect for me.
All right, let's back it up with following up with Miller, because Miller did recognize that early on playing center that he did have to work on some things. We spoke to Doug yesterday about something that we saw in Hard Knocks. Aaron Rodgers was talking to his centers about how he likes the ball snapped. Does that conversation go on with you? I mean, you're kind of new to the position.
Yeah. I've been told I have a weird way of snapping under center. I tend to move it to the right a little bit, but we've adjusted, and we actually get to film it now in practice, and now we could see what's going on. And it took a minute, honestly, to figure that out under center. But, it's like an everyday thing. That conversation's definitely came up a lot.
So this is kind of the science of football, where if the snap doesn't go well, people really notice it. But if it's seamless, you don't really have any appreciation for why it's seamless. So as a former quarterback, Caleb, what do you think of what Doug said where he's like, it doesn't matter. I think it does. I think it does matter to him, but I also, to me, that is another notch on the maturity belt of Doug Brumfield, because he's taking a leadership role, and it's like, hey, whatever I need to do, I'm going to do. And by the way, the beginning of the whole conversation was they're rotating centers. So what's it like to work with multiple centers in the fall? It's got to be a challenge.
Yeah, it is a challenge. And I think, like you said, I think that was a political answer from Doug. I think he definitely, maybe he hasn't thought about it much, but he knows that there's a preference and where he wants the ball. But that's the position. That's quarterback. You take responsibility. It's your job. It's your fault when it goes bad, all of that stuff. So doesn't really matter at this point, at least what he says to us. Now, the conversation, obviously, with Miller and other centers and Haas and guys that are rotating at center, a little different. Like, hey, put it here. Let's demand perfection in practice. And that's kind of what you do from a quarterback standpoint. I think Doug is a special case because he does have a bigger catch radius. So maybe it doesn't impact him as much when it's a little bit of an off snap, talking about shotgun. And then he is taller. So I think for centers, when he goes under center, it's uncomfortable for him. And sometimes when he has to squat all the way down and get low to get down underneath a center who maybe doesn't hike their butt up enough. As bluntly as I can put it. We talked about this off air when I got to the NFL and how big the offensive linemen were. For me, when I was working out with the Colts, it was one of those things where it was like getting under center was so much easier. Like the centers were just naturally kind of sat higher. So my hands, I was almost upright when I went to get under center. Whereas when I was at UNLV and even back going to high school, I was almost doing a full squat just to get under center. So there's things that you work through that quarterback center exchange. And I think Doug definitely he is the guy. He is the number one guy. So I think they're going to eventually, each center, whoever it is taking snaps, is going to cater to what he does prefer. And that may be something he never speaks out loud to us. He's not Aaron Rodgers, right? Where he's going to put it out there to the media as he's mic'd up. He's going to do it in a controlled environment with the centers during CQ center exchange when they're doing that during practice. And he's going to make it known because I think there is a standard that each center has to have of where they're going to put the snap, the tempo even of the snaps, whether it's a spiral or not. Those things are important because the less you think about it as a quarterback, the more you can focus on your reads down the field or the mechanics of the action in the backfield.
Yeah, I can't even imagine playing the position and stressing over how the ball is going to come out when in a split second you have to be upright and start looking around the field and trying to get reads. To me, it's just too much, but that's why the position has evolved and it's more complicated now than ever. Let's close on this. And we've done kind of a hardcore podcast for this edition. The Bryant game is coming up on September 2nd. So as we tape this here, really 2 weeks away from the opener, can you take us into the mind of just the entire team and the coaching staff? Odom has talked about install, and like this week will be really big before game week. Is this about the norm when he's talking about install and what you're seeing at practice? Like what is it like down the stretch here? Is it mostly seamless? Like, hey, here's different things we're installing, or is this one of those weeks where you're kind of stressed? You're like, man, now I'm getting the freaking that, we talk about that hose on freaking, full, getting just blasted with information. What is this, last week before the last week like?
I think if you mark it by scrimmages, and this is kind of how I always looked at camp, if you mark the scrimmages, they're almost like preseason games. Like they're the last chance to kind of get evaluation for coaches and players on where you stand. The depth chart now starts to shake out, especially the scrimmage that's going on tonight. As we're recording this, it's going to be later today. But those things are the last chances. So I look at it through those ones. This will be the second scrimmage. And with 2 more weeks, I would say this scrimmage is probably the last time that you're really going to have a chance to make an impact as far as getting onto the depth chart. And it's probably the last time that there's going to be so much install. Like the heavy hose, the fire hose of install is probably going to trickle down to a garden hose next week, right? On that last week of camp where, yeah, you might still install some stuff, but it's about fine-tuning, understanding what you do know, what you've already received. The coaching staff has to really evaluate that in the scrimmage. What do we know? What are we comfortable calling? What are we comfortable coverage-wise, systems, et cetera, et cetera. Then this last week of camp is really going to be focused on fine-tuning those things, maybe installing a little bit of wrinkles here and there to the things that you already understand. But it's definitely going to slow down from the install standpoint after the scrimmage, in my opinion. This is I no insight from coaches. They haven't told me this, but this is just kind of the structure of camps that I've been involved with. The last week of camp, you really start to shift gears into the season mode, where you're trying to focus on getting your legs back. Yes, getting reps, but you want to dial back as much as you can physically. There's a limit to that. You don't want to sit around. You're not in season mode because you still have a week worth of work to do. But the depth charts start to shake out a little bit. If you're comfortable with it, you start to peek ahead to your opponent, get some extra preparation there. Because there's teams that are playing week 0. There's teams that are kicking off next week, right? So you have an opportunity to do some film work and some research on your opponents, potentially. But then you're rolling right into the season, not just season, but school. Like there's a whole element that I think you have to brace your team for with this next week, because you have them to yourself for another week. But school starts in week 1 for UNLV. So that's a whole nother can of worms that you really have to slow down and your expectations for. And the demand, I guess, the load that you put on your players has to decrease and get them ready for that. Because that's a big part of this, the student athlete aspect.
It's so crazy. It really is. And we both just said crazy. It's so crazy. I'm sure in your job, and I know in mine, once football season starts, I do a daily radio show Monday to Friday. Like my schedule does change. And I've actually, I don't know if people want to go behind the curtain on radio, but there's been times the last couple of weeks where I'm like, man, I'm not as ready as I want to be for my show because I'm trying to figure out, kind of get a rhythm on getting ready for the show, but also covering UNLV football and practice. And I was sitting out there the other day, and Thursday, it was hot, right? And it's you add in the humidity with all this weather coming, and it was hot. And I was thinking to myself, man, these guys just went through about 3 hours of practicing, and soon, like the second half of the day, for football players, I'd be like, yeah, I'm done. And it's like, no, you have to go to class. And that is a challenge as a student athlete. Man, that's a heavy load. It really is. So I think you were suggesting for the younger guys who haven't been through it, now their whole schedule is going to have to adjust as they're getting ready for the first game. And then there's the first game. We'll talk about this next week. These are really unique spots. Like San Jose State, week 1 is playing USC. You can find out a lot about USC when you're prepping, and coaches and players, especially the coaches, are like, crazy on getting every edge. There is the other side when you play the Howards, you play the Southern Utahs, you play the Bryants, where you're like, well, we don't exactly know what's going on here. And I know you've talked about this about, hey, in game is going to be really important. So last one, and we can make official season predictions next week. And by the way, the Barry Odom Radio Show debuts 2 Wednesdays from now on August 30th at Parkway Tavern, 215 and Flamingo. Based on what you've seen and vibes and kind of health, what do you think is realistic? I saw the for a record. So upside and downside for UNLV, according to this guy, Big Game Boomer. A downside is 2-10, upside 6-6. I actually think the upside is higher, but what's realistic on personnel, new coaches, schedule? Real quick on this before we get out of here. What do you think?
I think the upside is more realistic, honestly. I think personnel, system change. I think UNLV is in a situation where there's not a lot of film on this, offensively and defensively, from the personnel being completely overhauled, the amount of transfers in. I don't think, and this is, again, outsiders maybe not having a peek at this, not being able to see it. It's a completely different team. Outside of a couple positions, I think there's so much makeover and so much newness to this team that I think they're going to be a new look team. I think it's improvement, if I can say it that way. I think top to bottom, the total team speed, things like that have increased dramatically. The new systems on both sides of the ball, I think, will benefit UNLV down the stretch. And this was a team that was right there, I think, last year from a talent perspective. They were in just about every game they played last season against top teams in the conference, Fresno State, San Diego State, those teams that it was a 50-50 game. So I would say the upside is probably there. In those situations, I think, with some of the consistency and the structure of the defense and offense kind of being set, I think the upside is there. I wouldn't be shocked at all by a 6-7 win team this season. And we haven't got a deep dive into the opponents that they'll be playing, because obviously that has a lot to do with how good they're going to be. But just from what we've watched during fall camp, I think the expectations internally are that they can be a winning football team. And I don't see any reason to disagree with that. I think in key positions, they're top of the conference in key positions, namely figuring out the quarterback spot. I think Doug is a viable solution there. And that's going to be huge. I think him having a good year has a lot to do with this. But I realistically, and this is not fanning out, I get it that I'm an alumni and I'm not trying to, put dubs on things here, but I think UNLV has a shot, just like I thought last year, to be a bowl contending team. And things have to go right. They can't be hampered by injuries and so on and so forth. It's the same story, but I think the talent is there for UNLV to be a winning football program.
All right, Caleb. We wrap up the preseason next week, and then we get ready for game 1 on September 2nd. Good job today, and I'll talk to you soon.